Well, we are officially 4:30, so I will go ahead and get us started right now. We are missing some people from our panel, but hopefully they'll straggle in here. Welcome to ChatGPT and Education. We are doing a roundtable today for Faculty Development Day. I'm Ron Eastman. I'm the Senior Online Course Administrator. Some of you may know me from administering Canvas for the college. Our panel today includes Chad Jorgensen, English instructor, Andrew Sagarts, who's a law and business administration instructor, Chris Voorhees, who's our education accessibility specialist and an instructional designer. We also have David Benson, another instructional designer, and Jessica Delmonico, another instructional designer. And if she shows up, I think Cindy Catherwood may pipe in a little bit too. She's our Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. So welcome. Before we get started, one quick little note here, if I can switch this slide. There we go. Stipend information. If you are a part-time instructor, in order to be paid the $18 stipend for this session, please private message me, Ron Eastman, in the Zoom chat. And please include the following information: your first name, last name, and your employee number. And that will help me to make sure that you get that taken care of. So that is out of the way. I'll repeat this at the end as well. So I want to start off and talk a little bit about academic skepticism. If those of you who've been teaching for a while may remember when Wikipedia launched on the scene. Back January 15th, 2001, Wikipedia launched. In 2006, just 5 years later, Stephen Colbert mocked Wikipedia on his TV show. He called it Wikipedia, an irresponsible scholarship. We had Alaska Senator Ted Stevens introduce legislation to Congress to ban schools' use of Wikipedia, or using that for schools. In 2007, we had a librarian in New Jersey who had a campaign called Just Say No to Wikipedia, banned it from all their school districts' computers. In 2011, Linda O'Connor altered her district's course by allowing Wikipedia and acknowledging that students should be taught to use multiple internet resources and be able to evaluate what is good information from bad information. And in 2012, example of how to use internet reference resources, there's a link here as well. So I'll probably provide the slides at the end for anyone who wants them. So Wikipedia did cause some problems when it hit the scene, and we're kind of seeing similar things with ChatGPT. So we're going to talk today about several things. So our agenda, first we're going to have a quick presentation. What is ChatGPT? What is LMS technology? Where is that in response to ChatGPT? What is ChatGPT not so good at? And then we'll have our roundtable discussion. So we're going to start with, what is ChatGPT? So ChatGPT, the GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, is a chatbot launched by an organization called OpenAI in November 2022, so just a few months ago. ChatGPT is a predictive text tool. It is sometimes referred to as a large language model. You might hear that term, or LLM, used to describe it often. The tool actually has been turned loose on the internet, and it's had the ability to read books, websites, Wikipedia. It can look at all kinds of different things, and it's gathering all that knowledge and learning from it. It essentially, though, is a predictive text tool. It's a large language model. And what that means, if you've ever used a phone that has predictive text when you're, say, messaging on your phone, sometimes you'll see it'll suggest your next word for you. And that is actually doing the same thing ChatGPT does. So it is actually looking at what you've written in the past, perhaps looking at other messages you've had in the past with people, and it will correct things sometimes for you based on your history. It will predict what it thinks your next word might be based on what you're writing at that point in time. And it's pretty good at that. And ChatGPT is excellent at it, but there's downsides. So as far as calling it an artificial intelligence, I honestly think personally that's a little bit of a stretch. It does seem intelligent sometimes, but it really, as a large language model, a predictive text tool, it doesn't really know anything. It just is regurgitating things, and it does it in a way that generally is pretty good English. Also, it learns via feedback from users. So any user who's using it can rate the answers that it gets, and then it takes that information and uses it to further enhance its ability to give answers to people. So our English 1010 class has a first assignment in Module 1, and that is, what does community mean? And I thought it'd be good to give a little quick demo of what ChatGPT does. So in that assignment, this is a pretty much not exact word for word version of their assignment, but essentially they're asked to write an essay on what it means to be born as a community and what does it mean to find a community. So I am going to stop my share real quick, and I'm going to change my share so that I can share my browser, and we will see ChatGPT in action. I don't want to download it. Sorry about this. Okay, so this here is ChatGPT, and we're going to actually ask it in real time to write us that essay. So without giving it any further information, I'm going to paste in just exactly that command. Let me move my Zoom bar to the top. So I'm going to ask it to write a 1,000-word essay on what it means to be born as part of a community. And in real time, ChatGPT is giving us a 1,000-word essay. I'm not going to count the words to make sure, but you can see it does it in real time. Let it finish. It is done. So one of the things I noticed right off when I started playing with ChatGPT and asking it to do things like this kind of an assignment is you notice right away that the sentence structure is very uniform. Lengths of sentences, they're all a certain length, that you don't get very many 5 or 6 word sentences, which is something that you might see in a student submission. You see a lot of commas. I have always thought of myself as someone who overuses commas, but I see ChatGPT loves to start a paragraph with something like, however, comma, in order to find a community, comma, when we find a community, comma, however, comma, there's ultimately comma. It does that quite frequently. So ChatGPT, you can pretty much see in real time what it's doing, and you can kind of see the differences in what you might see from a typical student submission. I had a second question that is actually very similar, but in this case, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do something and to reference a specific article. And I think this is one of the key strengths that ChatGPT has, in that if it's not familiar with something, you can provide it the link, and it can then generate a response based on that and incorporate information from that link. So this time we're going to ask in response to this essay, and then I've got the link for it, Megan Garber's essay, What Does Community Mean? What has led to the evolution of the term community? And so ChatGPT is going to write a response. It's quickly reviewed that essay, and it's now writing a response that is analyzing it in the way that we've asked it to. Pretty neat, actually. And it does it in real time, but you notice there's some of the similar things that we saw prior. Lots of comma usage, lots of starting off of a sentence or a paragraph rather with a short phrase or single word and then a comma. That's a common thing that it does, and it's just does it all the time. So I'm going to stop sharing that really quick. Okay, so we've seen ChatGPT in action. We are going to talk about some of the things that LMSs are doing or not doing, rather, in response to ChatGPT. So Canvas does not have any built-in tools to combat cheating. So I want to get that out of the way. But the college, we do subscribe to Turnitin. That's our provider for anti-cheating software for paper authorship. What Turnitin does is it looks for similarities with other known sources of writing. But ChatGPT's new writing, it is generating it on the fly, as you just saw. So it might have similarities, but it's essentially paraphrasing what it's learned from other places. Turnitin is exploring ways to combat AI, and it has stuff in beta testing right now. They've been working on it since at least the beginning of the year, and I do not know when they're going to release anything, but they should be doing that at some time. Technology solutions, they are promising. Some work has already been done by independent researchers to analyze ChatGPT outputs. There's an article on that from NPR. Cites that uniformity of sentence length, something that I mentioned earlier. There are already many tools out there that claim to be able to analyze writing and give you a valuation on whether it thinks it was AI generated or not. And they seem to be pretty accurate. I've tested them with some of my own writing and then put in some writing from ChatGPT, and they seem to be fairly accurate. But I would say that I would be uncomfortable myself if I was teaching a class confronting a student and accusing them of cheating based on what one of these tools said, though it might be a reason to open a dialogue. So will technology be a solution to this technology problem? Technology will provide tools. It's never going to be a perfect solution. Good assignment design is probably always going to be the best solution. So what is ChatGPT not so good at? So some of the things that it's not good at is it's not up to date on current events. It can't relate to the personal or geographically local experiences of a student. It has no idea what their life has been like, and it knows nothing personally about them. It can't watch a video or analyze visual elements. It only deals in written words. So if it's never seen a picture, it can't watch a video. It doesn't deal with that at all. It also doesn't work well with counterfactuals. So if you were to have an assignment, for example, that asked, how would the world be different if the result of World War II would have been the Axis powers winning? It really can't deal with that very well. Though sometimes if it's gotten sources for information that were, say, fiction writing, doing something like that, it might be able to use that as a source. But one of the things that I think is most important is that ChatGPT gets facts wrong, and it does it often. And the reason I have a penguin there, I don't know who watched 60 Minutes recently when they did a story on ChatGPT, and Leslie Stahl, the reporter, they had asked ChatGPT a question while they were with an expert, and ChatGPT gave a great answer overall. It looked to be pretty good until the very last sentence where it talked about 3% of Antarctic ice being penguin urine. And they had an expert who came on and said, actually, penguins don't have the ability to do that. So that is actually not true. But if you look at the internet, that is something that's a meme that's out there. It's been out there for a while. There's been articles written about it, though it's not true. It is 3% of Antarctic ice is not penguin urine. So it doesn't always get things right. So time for our panel discussion. I do have some questions that I will cede to our panel. But if you have questions or comments, please use the chat feature to ask your question of the panel. David Bentz is going to be monitoring that, and we will have questions from you and fit them in as well. I'm going to start it off, and I'm going to put this out to the panel. Anyone who wants to answer this is certainly welcome to do so, though I may start calling on people if I have to. What fears do you have of ChatGPT in your classroom?
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I did hear that somebody did confront a student about it.
Okay.
And I guess my question is, if we suspect it, how are we supposed to approach it? What are our options? And, you know, how do we differentiate that between, you know, plagiarism? You know, those are the questions I'm having right now.
Well, Chad, do you want to field that one? I think that one might be up your alley.
Yeah, but I think, Melanie, that's a great question. It's one that I am sort of curious about as well. And not just, you know, I think from a teacher's perspective too, just the element of distrust that has entered the classroom, where a student maybe isn't using ChatGPT, but their writing sort of reads like it, you know, and this element of distrust, you know, as if teachers needed another sort of challenge this year or these last years, it certainly has introduced a new one. I don't know how I'd answer that right now. I think it's always a difficult conversation to talk to students about plagiarism, but often if you're having those conversations with students, it's because there's hard evidence at that point. At least in my case, is that's been the case. And I haven't had a conversation with a student yet about concerns like this. But I'd be really wary of confronting a student with these concerns. I'd be really wary. And, you know, it sort of gets to something that I think is a larger part of this discussion regarding ChatGPT. And I'd hope that I'm creating my assignments in such a way that this element of doubt doesn't even enter into the discussion, because I've gotten to know this student. I know who they are. I know what their interests are, their passions. I sort of know how they write. Maybe we're working on multiple drafts of a paper. And so it'd be very hard for a student to just turn in something that was ChatGPT generated without my knowing it. And very likely they wouldn't have the desire to do it. But that's because of maybe the way my class is constructed, the discipline I teach in. So I'm not sure in other disciplines and how other people are assigning things, how it might shake out for other folks.
I've
Good
had
answer.
to, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
So I teach ESL, and I've had to confront someone about it. Because in ESL, you just clearly know when somebody turns in a first draft and it has absolutely no grammatical, punctuation errors, no errors whatsoever. And so I knew that he knew about it. He's from China. He had talked to me about it in kind of a, ha ha ha, you can't catch it. And so when he turned in his first draft, I took him aside and I talked to him, and I just asked him if he used GPT, because I knew he knew about it. And he said, no, he just wouldn't admit it. And Chad, this is what I come to, is that this is what I said to my student. I can't help you if you do this. You're in this class to learn. You're in this class to become a better writer and to learn the English grammar. And if you do this, I can't help you. So you are not improving your English skills. You are hurting yourself. And he was like, I don't think so. I didn't use it, but I don't think so. I'm going to get an A on this and I don't have to do another draft. This is like,
well, Cheryl, I think that, like, I mean, I totally understand that. And I think that it's one of the reasons that it's really important how everybody at the college talks about the purpose of college, right? The more we sort of echo this message that what we're doing is awarding credits so that you can get this job, so that 10 years from now, you know, you've achieved what you wanted to achieve, as opposed to what you're doing right now is intrinsically valuable. And these are like real skills that you're developing. The more we give that message that the work that we're doing together is intrinsically valuable, it's not just a credit. And the more, you know, support we have at the college for that message. But that's an uphill battle, I think, in today's sort of climate regarding education and the way people talk about education.
I think it's important to remember that in a situation like that, whether it's ChatGPT that's suspected to have written the item, or if the submission may have been written by a friend or a relative of that person, we have no way of determining that. And there's not going to, while we might have technology tools that points towards a likelihood of something being from AI, we're never going to know 100% for sure that it is. But I think for myself, I think the thing to keep in mind is that students only robbing themselves. They are paying for an education that they're not getting any benefit from, and they're, especially in an ESL class, if your intent should be to learn English, and if you're not going to learn English, that's going to harm you later down the road. But
you can even write an essay and say, put in grammar mistakes, and it'll do it. No, literally. And it'll make mistakes with sentence structure and with verbs and with commas. So it looks like somebody wrote it who's a second language speaker or a non ELL student. Literally, I tried it.
Well, one of the things that I thought about for ChatGPT that I think is kind of an important thing is it can be a tool to overcome writer's block. It's a way to kind of seed a new writing, because I personally, when I start writing something, sometimes I just, until I can get that first sentence out, I could be pounding my head on my desk for an hour before I can get that first sentence going. But using ChatGPT as a tool to start the process of writing, it could give me a seed to build on. And I think that you're going to see students doing that. And I think that we could expect that. And I think that that's okay when it happens, to be quite frank with you. But to do a pure output from ChatGPT and turn that in as an original submission, not quite so good, obviously. Andrew, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I take a bit of a different approach than trying to prevent. I think it's like, I've raised teenagers, and I think it's like trying to say abstinence only, no sex, don't do it. Well, the fact of the matter is they're probably going to do it. We can put things in our syllabus. I mean, are we going to try to catch the teenager, in the act or something? I take the position that we maybe should embrace ChatGPT and design assignments so that we're asking students to use it, and to use it to make say their own writing better. Yes, it's very flexible. You could ask it to write what you just did, Ron, in a high school level, and then you could ask it to do this, to put that same text in and say, now change it to a PhD level. Well, why not have the students run both of those and then have them do a compare and contrast and show how that level, this is just one idea, but show how that has leveled up. Why is it better? Or have them take, ChatGPT is not very creative. So have them run a ChatGPT, make a story, do something, and then ask the student to augment it to make it more creative. So I think there are some ways we can use it. It's scary, but so was the calculator when it came out, and math teachers probably had to change their underwear or something about that. But it's a tool and it's here to stay. So we're gonna, we may as well try to figure out how to use it.
Andrew, if I may add something, the first time that students could take their exams at home online, right? We were worried about using their textbook and cheating and all that. And now that's the norm, right? So it's one of those changes that we're resisting right now, but eventually it's going to be part of the pop culture, and students are going to have AI write their papers, and eventually, we're going to have to get used to that. I'm sorry for saying this, but I was one of those people that really resisted taking quizzes and exams, at home, and they created some respondents or other things that could prevent people from cheating. But eventually, this is the way of the future, and I think that's going to happen. So that's why I'm kind of cool about it. So,
Eric raised his hand. What did you have to add, Eric?
So one of the ways I could see preventing, overuse of ChatGPT is just by, so I teach cybersecurity, just so you have that framing on it. So I asked ChatGPT over the weekend, I asked it two things. I asked it to write a one-page paper in APA format about the dangers of advanced persistent threats and how to protect a network against them. It's a very technical question, and it gets into the weeds, but it wrote a very high level paper with no sources. Like, it even threw in like the running header, the title, but it didn't have any sources behind it. But then, I mean, I'm thinking if you keep more subjectivity to your activities, it's probably going to be harder to use ChatGPT, because the exact same night for my YouTube channel, I fed it 5 different ingredients that were complete nonsense for a cocktail, and I asked ChatGPT to make a cocktail from these 5 ingredients. It did it because it's very concrete. As where with like that advanced persistent threat thing, it's a cyber threat of some kind. And I asked it to write a paper on advanced persistent threats. It didn't have any sources for it. So in my classes, if you turn in a paper without sources, you don't get credit for the paper. So I'm thinking, I mean, and that's going to be all up to you whether or not you want to pursue it that way. But I'm probably going to really button down on sources and like quoting in line, using endnotes, that sort of thing. I don't know if any of you think that would help, because that was kind of like my mindset coming into this meeting.
I think to kind of add to that, I think that doing things, and Chad kind of alluded to this earlier, that's doing things in stages where you have them start with a draft and go through the progression of making their essay submission, and having them show their work along the way is certainly one way of combating that. Though, I mean, ChatGPT, to be fair, and I say this because there's no students in here listening, it would not be that hard to reverse engineer sources for an assignment, after having ChatGPT create the essay, and then just go find some sources that have some of those concepts in them. Victoria, you had something to add.
Oh, I was going to say, maybe one of the solutions to some of these problems is that perhaps we shouldn't allow students to submit papers so early in the term. Maybe allow them to submit short assignments where they're actually answering questions first. And then we get to know the voice of the student as time goes on, because we know our students' voices. We know what students sound like on paper. For instance, Cheryl was saying there was a Chinese student who could barely speak English, and then your paper is perfect. I mean, that's a big red flag. And so if I have a student who is struggling to answer a simple question in class, and then they suddenly submit a perfect paper, oh, wow, that will be a red flag. And I catch that all the time in regular, before ChatGPT became a big thing. So I think we should just give regular assignments first that have to do with the concepts in class, and knowing how to answer basic questions. And then we now know their voices. We know how they write things. We know how they, basically by the time they submit a paper to you, that's them talking. I usually can tell when my student is talking, and I can tell when that student is not talking. I've known this for a few decades. You do know the voice of your students. So that's my, because I agree with Ron, or I think it was someone who just said that just now. A time will come when this ChatGPT will have the way to get sources, and then there will be sources for the paper, and then you won't know who wrote it unless you know your student's voice. Thank you.
Can I jump in real quick, Victoria? I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody's perspectives, and I appreciate Eric's dog in the background. I'll take all of that you got. That's a good look. That is a good looking dog, Eric. Yeah, I'm wary of like the conversation, ultimately being framed as those who are against ChatGPT and those who are enthusiastic about it. I would hope that we're like, all of us are sort of on a spectrum of, we understand that it's going to have amazing uses and that we'd like to prevent its abuse. And I think one thing that we have to consider too is not just our students this year, but the students who arrive in our classrooms 4 or 5 years from now, who have been living with ChatGPT, and what that's going to mean when they arrive in our classroom. And in part, it depends on how like valuable you think being able to order your thoughts and develop your thoughts in writing is, and thinking critically in writing is. And I'm certainly a person who feels like being able to find information, evaluate information, analyze information, synthesize information, express that information, all of that stuff is deeply important, and we see it in writing as one of the best ways to develop it. So if we have students who haven't been developing these muscles, if they've been abusing it and they haven't been developing these skills, and then they come into our classroom maybe potentially underprepared, I do worry about like its abuse. And I don't think that makes me anti-Chat GPT. It's just I worry that these skills potentially aren't going to, we're not going to be able to have our students developing those skills.
I think that's very wise take on that too. So I kind of wanted to bring in our instructional designers and see what ideas do they have on how to modify an existing assignment to take away the ability for ChatGPT to be used as a sole source. So David, Chris, and Jessica, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Obviously not. No, I think it's a new technology. So I think we just kind of have to see what sort of best practices come about. I don't think we're going to find all of the answers within our institution. I think we're going to see models for discovery on how to do assignments. And I think not all assignments are the same, right? Because all of our disciplines are a little bit different. So, the way that ChatGPT is going to basically impact us, may affect one person more so than another in a different discipline. I think, again, you guys have all touched on a lot of different aspects of how to do this. But remember, the tool is evolving itself, right? So as we evolve, it's going to evolve. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation. That's really all I have, Ron. In a second, let's get to some of the questions that are coming in from the chat, but I'll let my other colleagues speak as well.
Okay. Chris,
so
Jessica?
I think, sorry to jump in. I think a couple of things on the combating ChatGPT side have already been raised, and that's breaking your assignments down into stages, where they first write a thesis statement and then maybe write an outline, multiple drafts of the same paper is an effective way, because then again, they may use ChatGPT, but then you're going to force them to modify that and evaluate how well ChatGPT wrote an essay or answered a discussion question. And so other things I can think of are, again, the degree of specificity in the types of questions you're asking will confound ChatGPT, because it tends to speak in generalities. And, it's really good at summarizing. It's less effective at higher order level of thinking, like analysis and synthesis. So if you're focusing, if you're going up on Bloom's taxonomy, if you're focusing on higher level questions, you're going to get more, ChatGPT is going to start giving you more generalized responses. And then also keep in mind that it's limited. So the more current, if you're asking about, for example, current events, if it's a history class, or in addition, like personalized information, if you're asking, again, it's trained not to provide evaluative or opinions. So if you're asking students to, provide examples from their own life or apply it to something that you did, if it's a hybrid class, a discussion you had in class, ChatGPT is not going to have access to that information. It's not going to have access to current events within the last year, right? So there are the recommendation is to familiarize yourself with the the deficiencies in what ChatGPT does now. And obviously, like David says, those are going to evolve as it gets better. But right now, it's not good at analyzing. It's not good at being very specific. It's also very repetitive. You'll see a lot of sentences in the ChatGPT output that are duplicative, and it makes the same point over and over again. And then again, personal questions or personal experience type questions and more recent current events in assignments are good ways to confound the use of ChatGPT, or at least again, I agree with Ron. There's and some others that this is not going away, and students will use it to perhaps create initial drafts or to get themselves started. But there are ways to phrase your questions, your assignments to, force students to at least do the work of editing, which I think for your English instructors out there, obviously you appreciate the value of editing and multiple drafts. So those are the kinds of things that ChatGPT is not as effective at right now. So there's a lot of material out there on its deficiencies, and if you familiarize yourself with that, I think you'll come up with ways to create your assignments that will disincentivize students from using it. I don't think it's a matter of saying you can't use it. We're not, that's not realistic. But you can disincentivize them from using it by creating, for example, a rubric that has very specific criteria that ChatGPT is not going to inherently know about, and therefore drive down the potential grade they can get by just flat copying and pasting a ChatGPT generated essay, into a Word doc and submitting it as their assignment. So those are my initial thoughts on
I think
how to address that.
Your mention of rubric is a good one, because I that's one thing to keep in mind is ChatGPT is going to have no idea what the rubric says, and there's really not a way to input that. So you can put in essentially all the requirements of the assignment into ChatGPT and have that utilize that for the output, but your rubric can be grading things that are not in that overall design of the assignment, and you make your students aware of that, and good luck to them to use ChatGPT to overcome that in some way. Their personality is going to have to come through at some point. Jessica, did you have anything to add to what Chris and David have said?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, I know Ron, you mentioned it, the counterfactual thinking, which kind of deals with like what is not but could have or would have been type of scenarios or situations. So if for like example, like if you were to do like a discussion or a prompt, like if I didn't take a sip of my coffee, like I wouldn't have burned my tongue type thing, but obviously to your whatever you're teaching, just formatting it that way would allow students kind of to analyze scenarios from different perspectives with like a more of a critical lens that GPT wouldn't be able to pick up on.
I think that absolutely very, very good contribution there. I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that in different classes, the whole role of the whole sequence of writing is going to be different. Where in Chad's English class, obviously starting with the thesis statement, the outline, et cetera, that's all the stages of the process. In Eric's cybersecurity class, he's probably not requiring those steps. And I don't know that it'd be easy for him to work that into his assignment, but doing things like Jessica suggested, such as making it somehow personalized or counterfactuals. And I think what would be the ultimate assignment right now? And that would be asking it to analyze a current event with a counterfactual, that's personalized. So how do you feel about Ukraine if Russia had not invaded? I don't know. I just made that up on the spot, but it's using all three in one. So ChatGPT would have no idea how to deal with that and is never going to do that. But obviously that's not going to work in Eric's class. It might work in Victoria's class though. So you're welcome to steal my assignment if you'd like. So David, go ahead with some of the chat questions.
Yeah, so we've got some themes going. If you haven't opened up the little chat window, I suggest that you do that because your colleagues are having a little sidebar discussion over there.
Are they?
And you guys can, get in on some of that as well. So I have three themes here that have emerged, and I'm taking them kind of in the least complex to the more complex. So a couple of folks have asked, if you assign this to multiple students, will they get the same, output? So if somebody puts in the same thing, as another student, will the description look the same, or the generated text be the same?
I can actually answer that. In my experience, it is very similar just about every time. It's not identical. It's pulling from the same information as it does it, and its writing style is always going to be very similar. You see the sentence length, the overuse of commas. Maybe it's not an overuse. Chad probably wants to correct me on that. It's probably pretty good use of commas, but it is a lot of ways of seems to start a paragraph with a word and a comma all the time. But doing those, the output is similar, but it's never going to give the same exact thing twice. So,
and in fact, in playing around with it, I've basically asked the same question phrased multiple ways, and I often get in several places the exact same sentence get generated. So students are, if they're just copying and pasting your discussion question or your, whatever the assignment is in there, then if multiple students are doing it, you're going to see duplication, and they're going to have a hard time rephrasing it in a specific enough way to generate different responses out of ChatGPT, and which brings you to maybe the realization that perhaps the best approach is just to be open about talking about this with students so that they all know about it. and then if and you can encourage them to use it in particular ways or to not use it at all, depending on your approach and your learning outcomes that you're aiming at. But at least they all know that it's out there, and they're going to have to think real hard about whether they want to use it, knowing that somebody else might turn in something that has the same couple of sentences or paragraphs in it. Because it, again, like Ron emphasizes, it does not analyze, it's not creative. It's just regurgitating the data it finds on the internet. So there's a lot of duplication.
I remember leading up to, as we were preparing for this roundtable today, Chad has said a lot of really things that I would call wise, very wise things about talking about the relationship with his students. And Chad, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I do just think that, and I think Carly asked in the chat how we teach students these important skills. I think the best thing we can do is get to know our students more, to have stronger relationships with them, to be able to spend more time with them, to help them find their passions. to work with them hand in hand as they grow. I don't believe students are generally cynical about their own education, even if parts of our culture are. I think our students want to become smarter, more skillful, more confident, and so they trust that MCC and all the folks here are genuinely trying to help them. So I just think the more that we're able to be put in situations where we can form those connections, the less, the abuse of ChatGPT becomes a problem, and the more we can focus on the ways in which it'll probably be a great tool for everyone. I think one thing that's really interesting, though, is this idea of, in English, we often talk about rhetoric and the rhetorical situation. Every time you enter into a writing situation or a communication situation, you have to ask yourself, well, like, who am I? Who's my audience? What's my message? And I feel like ChatGPT is in part going to change our discourse, all the way we talk to each other. The next time you get an email, will you be questioning, is this from a real person? Was this just generated? And so maybe in the future, we're going to prize things like authenticity a little bit more. Maybe we'll value personal experience a little bit more. I think that it's not just, changing our assignments, but it's also probably changing what we all appreciate in communication. And we can't exactly predict, how our discourse is going to change in the future.
Very good. David, did you have, we are nearing our end of our time, but if you've got a pressing thing to.
I've got two more.
Okay, let's do it.
So another quick one is, how do we deal with this on an institutional level? Like, has there been any discussion about adding things to this, the syllabi about this? I mean, maybe some of you like Chad, Andrew, maybe you can help with some of that. And then the last one, and we'll open this one up. This will be a big one. Is this plagiarism or is it not?
Is Cindy on? If she could answer the question about policy, I don't think she's here, but she'd be the best person to answer. But Chad and Andrew, are you guys aware of any conversations that have been had about it?
I mean, is it sort of like a semantic distinction? Like, it's not technically someone else's writing, so it's not plagiarism, but it's also not your writing, but it's being presented as your own. I mean, I think a common sense understanding of it would say that it's a version of, if it's not plagiarism, it's plagiarism adjacent, would be my feeling. Yeah, somebody could teach me if I'm wrong about that, though.
Andrew, from a law perspective, how would you look at that?
Well, I agree with what Chad said. Maybe it doesn't meet a technical definition. We'd have to have our policy wonks on to tell us that. But I think in my mind, it's nothing but plagiarism. It's not their work. It's somebody or something, I guess, else's.
But you can't prove it. So what happens when you accuse someone of plagiarism? I mean, in the past, I could use turnitin.com and I could say, I know that you plagiarized this because look, I can show you the sources that you use word for word, right? And we can have a conversation about it. But Andrew, so if you can't prove it, how do you accuse someone of plagiarism? Do you know what I'm saying? You cannot prove it.
What I have done in the past and is to I grade with a rubric, and I will grade down on a certain part. Let's say it's originality of work or something like that. So grade it down, and I let the student know that this doesn't seem like your work. This is your grade, and if you want to change that, you need to have a conversation with me. Well, oftentimes they won't have a conversation with me, and therefore they're getting a reduced grade. If they do have the conversation, then sometimes they have convinced me that it is their work. Other times they confess and say it's not, in which case I say, okay, well, we're not going to kick you out of the class, and I want to give you another chance to do the assignment, but you also need to write me a 2-page to get that opportunity, you need to write me a 2-page paper on why is copyright important. So I treat it delicately. I just don't know that we're going to be able to prevent it. So, and detection is going to be really hard. One thing about ChatGPT is that it gives passing answers. It gives B or C answers. So, one thing I may try to do is to have students run a ChatGPT and make it into an A answer.
Mhm.
So I'm going to toss out an idea, and I'm reluctant to, even though I'm a technology person, I'm reluctant to suggest a technology solution because I don't think technology shouldn't always be the solution. I think that some of the things that Chad's talked about, such as establishing the relationships, and then some of the things about how we design the assignment to make it very personalized, whether it be geographically personal or experiential personal, I think those are the best tools we have. But if you were having an assignment that was a short form assignment, and so I don't mean this is not a 10-page essay that's your final submission in your second creative writing class. This is in an ESL class. This is I want you to write 1 page about blank. You could use technology in that situation, and I hate to say this out loud, but you could use lockdown browser. Which essentially is going to force them to type within that window and not have another window open. And you do it as maybe you say, I need, 300 words on this topic, and you're doing that inside of an essay question and a Canvas quiz that requires lockdown browser. And that's all things we have already. I'm not pushing that for a solution, but for those short form things, that's something that could be done. Especially in a situation where Cheryl, where she's had a student that she suspected of doing it. She confronted the student denied it. Now I might challenge them and say, okay, well, I'm making the next assignment for the class be a short form essay requiring lockdown browser. So I'm going to see in real time you typing this. And essentially you get to, have that result where AI can't be a part of the equation. So there's just really no way to do it. So just tossing that out there. I hate the idea though. I said it out loud now and I hate it already. So
Ron, I have a quick question for the group. So Naomi Campbell and myself we hold you may have seen Naomi's announcements, the Teaching Learning Technology Roundtable. And one of the things that we're trying to do is build this kind of community of practice like we've got today going in this conversation. Do we need to have more conversations and more resources for faculty on this? I mean, this is a great conversation. It just seems to me that it begs for more from the institution to support you all.
Well, one thing I was thinking is that, we are a customer of Turnitin, okay? And this institution, why would us as an institution approach into it and ask them, is this something that they're working on? Is this something that they can do? Then they can get their arms around. This is their business. We aren't in this business. And we shouldn't have to change what assignments we're doing to try to match up to fight against ChatGPT.
I think that's valid, Bill. And Turnitin is working on it. So Turnitin actually is actively working on it. I don't know that it will be part of the product that we already subscribe to, which is the similarity checker. It likely will be though. And it will be a tool that'll be part of the arsenal that we'll have. However, I just want to caution that just because Turnitin or some other AI checker says something is likely generated via AI doesn't mean that it is. It just means it's likely. It's never going to be able to prove it. And just in the same way that you can't prove that the assignment wasn't written by their cousin, we have no idea. And but if we build our assignments and build them in a way where it's, I look at it and say, if I was to do a design of a course and sequence through certain steps. Like I might have a discussion board post where I'm asking them something personal, and then I advance to this and advance to this, and I go, and then finally we get to the point where I'm having them write an essay that relates back to the discussion board posts and the different responses that were there, you know, building on prior work, because ChatGPT would not be able to deal with that at all. It would have no idea what was in the prior discussion board posts. Those discussion boards are locked down and never a source for ChatGPT, so it would be impossible for it to be used in that situation, if that makes sense. So things like that could be a design solution.
I know one thing I use to try and combat like assignment sharing, and it may be applicable here, is I actually have because most of the assignments I assign are like short, like written answer. Maybe they might take up like half a page in written, or maybe 3/4 of a page. But I have a Microsoft Word template document that I have saved in my Canvas section. And I actually recommend to my students using it because it's APA formatted already. But the main thing I like about it is it forces the student to save it on the computer they're on, and it records the amount of editing time, the registered user of Office. It's just another correlation piece you can use to find out, okay, well, why did it take 3 minutes to write a 8-page paper? So it does open up the communication a little more with the students, rather than saying, yeah, you plagiarized, or yeah, you used something, you know, something like this. It at least allows the student to say, well, hey, I wrote it in something else, and they can show you and go, oh, cool, okay, move on. But that's one thing I implemented maybe like 2 years ago, and it seemed to deter this type of activity a little more.
That's a good potential solution. I like that. So that's good. David, before we wrap up, any other pressing chat question we should get to?
No, I think we've got everything. I think people are out there looking for tools, but again, if you have a chance, take a look at the chat for today's discussion and see what some of your colleagues are saying. The tools that they're looking for, and I'm fairly certain that they'll be shortly forthcoming, are tools that will analyze the text and tell you whether or not it was AI generated or not. So those tools will be coming as well.
So just a reminder, first, thanks for everyone for coming today. Thanks for our panel for participating. I appreciate it, all of you guys. Again, just a reminder, anyone who's a part-time instructor, if you haven't sent me a private chat message with your first name, last name, and employee number, please do that, and that will be used to pay your stipend. But thank you guys for your time today. Thanks for joining, and I hope you got something good out of this.
Thanks, Ron. Great.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everybody. That was really useful.